Well, those of you who may be Apple fans should recognize the phrase reality distortion from the biography of Steve Jobs. The people who worked around Jobs were fond of referring to his reality distortion capability. And by that they meant Steve Jobs's ability to will the world into being the world that he wants it to be, to believe the world as he sees it is the world. And that's a powerful force for visionary work. I mean, say what you will about Apple and about Steve Jobs for that matter. He created objects that have transformed the way in which we navigate the world, in which we understand the world, in which we get information, and in which we communicate and mediate between each other. And those objects are fully formed commodities in the Marxist sense, things that come to stand in for relationships between people. And, you know, we could think about social media a lot in that regard as well. Today I want to think a little bit about the way in which reality distortion is mobilized as a means of coping with the experience of modernity, with the rapid change of technology and ways of navigating the world that was a function of the modern period, and also a way of trying to willfully make that world over into your own image. I'm going to start with an image by Granville. This is a great image from a series of images that he did called Un autre monde, another world. They were again published in the mass press, and it's this lovely, lovely image of the planets conveniently aligned so that they can serve as the basis of a very contemporary, in the 19th century, iron bridge with very contemporary gas street lighting. Those mechanisms that made the darkness of nightlife seem like the daytime, seem like another part of the day that could be inhabited, brought the nightscape of the city out of the shadows and into the light that would become the light of Times Square and the light of Pudong and Shanghai. Here is imagined to be supported by, almost impossibly, by the planet, so that extraterrestrial travel and the wonder of being a flaneur, that is to say a stroller and urban inhabitant out for a walk across the street, smoking his cigar, is conceived of in these otherworldly terms. I hope this image reminds you a little bit of the Gumby cartoon that we saw, of that marvelous scene in which Gumby's dad uses a hook and ladder truck to get up to the moon to rescue Gumby. It's that same kind of way of creating an imaginary world by colliding different aspects of familiar worlds and familiar objects. I can't help but bring back Méliès's A Trip to the Moon for just a minute in that same regard. The notion of exploring the storytelling and fantasy making possibilities of cinema as a function of interplanetary travel, of going beyond the confines of the Earth. I won't belabor A Trip to the Moon because I want to bring to your attention another one of his films. It was done a little bit later. It's a bit longer, but it created just as much of a sensation. It was wildly popular in its day. That's Méliès's Impossible Voyage, Le Voyage à travers l'impossible. And we can make corny jokes about my French. A film that is based on Jules Verne's The Impossible Voyage, but is a really genuinely funny commentary on the extremes of scientific investigation, the pompousness and somewhat ludicrousness of the scientific community. In the Impossible Voyage, we see a cohort from the Institute for Incoherent Geography that sets out to explore the interior of the sun. And in order to get to the interior of the sun, they use every mode of modern conveyance known to man. And there's a wonderful sequence in which first they take the train, and the train goes through, maybe it's the Alps, we think, and you see the little toy train go across the background of the set, these kinds of funny scale relationships that is also a part of fantasy and otherworldliness, and then circle back around in the foreground to chug across the screen again. They go in a rocket ship, and they go in a submarine, and this fantasy of modern travel is taken to its illogical and comical extreme. Méliès explores this world of fantasy, which is also very topical, a world that seems otherworldly, but is also precisely in response to the conditions of modern life on the screen. It's a virtual world of reality distortion, if you will. But what happens when artists and architects decide to explore that intersection on the ground, as it were, in a bricks and mortar sense? I want to conclude this lecture by looking just a little bit at the work of the Catalan architect from Barcelona, and I think there's a number of students in this class from Barcelona, Antoni Gaudí. Barcelona is a great place to go, a very essential place to go to see the work of Gaudí, and I strongly encourage it if you have the opportunity, because as much as we'll try to give you a little bit of a sense of his facades and interiors in this lecture, they really need to be walked through and seen to be believed. It really demands the test of the experience of the contemporary city with the experience of this early 20th century vision of modernity. We're going to look in a little bit of detail at the Casa Batlló, which was commissioned in 1904-1906 on the great new boulevard of the Passeig de Gràcia, and I really apologize for my Catalan pronunciation, in the Eixample in Barcelona. So the turn of the century was a moment when the new boulevards, boulevards like those boulevards that were built in Paris in the 19th century, were laid out in Barcelona, and consequently the middle class, the affluent middle class, migrated from the ancient city of the Gothic quarter into the new light and new space of these modernized boulevards. There was a great competition to build or to rebuild buildings to meet this grand new experience of modernity, and Gaudí was deeply bound up in this. The Casa Batlló was known affectionately as the House of Bones, and we're looking at the exterior second story facade here. You know, I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking that there is a way in which it is strangely bone-like and also strangely Bosch-like. I can't help but think again of that egg-like, skull-like cavity at the center of Bosch's panel of hell from the Garden of Earthly Delights, and think about this cement facade in another, in a similar register. It's bone-like but unnameable. It protects, in a way, that interior space that is glimpsed just beyond the windows, but it also entraps it a little bit. How did buildings like this come into being? Well, the first thing to say is that they are reimaginings of 19th century buildings that were already in a place, sort of solid, sensible bourgeois buildings for the most part, and to reclad them and reimagine them in this way was to make the argument, as did one critic of the time, that the bourgeois was no longer just a manufacturer or a banker. He was a man of style. He was a man who commanded an air of modernity and stood on the brink of the 20th century, the new century, and who signaled that commitment to the future by an embrace of the modern in every aspect of his life. So not only would he wear modern clothes, not only would he be transported by modern conveyances, but he would inhabit a thoroughly modern house. So that's the first thing to notice, that the Casa Batlló is a really nice house, but it's not a castle. It's a middle class, upper middle class dwelling. We're now looking from the inside out. And it's very interesting because from the outside you feel entrapped in this bone-like cage. And from the inside, you feel, I don't know, maybe as if you've been swallowed by a whale, but certainly as if you're in this kind of semi-aquatic, undulating space. And it's a really amazing space to navigate. Gaudí designed his dwellings down to their doorknobs, and that's something to really think about too, that the notion of thoroughly modern architecture was the notion of we used this word early on in the course, the notion of the gesamte Kunstwerk, of a total artwork, and that every aspect of it had to be imagined and controlled by the artist. I'm in danger of using the analogy to Steve Jobs a little bit too much, but in some ways these houses are kind of like Apple devices that really want to be perfect and perfectly designed in their own right, and are also then kind of closed boxes, don't allow for much innovation. And I think a lot of the way that that Steve Jobs must be turning in his grave at all the people who immediately customized their phones by putting those, I mean, we all have them, those terrible protective cases on them, that really interfered with the perfectness of the design the way it was. Gaudí, I think, similarly would have been driven crazy by someone trying to customize his interiors after he had designed them. So could a house be a total artwork? Could, on the one hand, the street be like a museum, so that these facades are experienced as a part of the urban landscape, as a part of the sensation of modernity that you traversed and experienced in an almost screen-like fashion. And one of the things that's interesting about the Casa Batlló is that the ground floor tenant, because there would have been a storefront on the ground floor, that's where the ticket windows to get in to the house, which is now a museum, are currently located. That storefront was occupied by the Pathé cinematographic and phonographic offices. So the storefront was actually occupied by the cinema, even as this facade presented itself as sort of like an amazing illusion to passers-by. And then on the inside, could the modern man demonstrate his allegiance to modernity by inhabiting a thoroughly modern interior, and at the same time, could the modern interior construct the modern man, so that a person would be encased in their experience of modern domestic architecture, almost in the way that jewels are encased in a jewel box. And we're looking now at the interior stairwell that structured the house. On the one hand, this is a marvel of engineering in many ways that brought natural light into the interior of the building, but it's conceived of as evocative of an almost underwater experience. Again, that experience of optical distortion. And I think we're including a little video that I took while I was at the Casa Batlló this summer that just gives you a sense of what it was like to look through the interior windows into this bluish space that not only evoked water by undulating forms, but by having the saturation of color of the tiles moderate as one looked up or looked down. So it wasn't all the same even blue throughout, but there was a kind of sense of gradation that gave you a sensation of looking at the surface from the deep, if you will. So I want to leave you with this thought, that perhaps architectural projects like those of Gaudí should not be understood as forms of escapism, as forms of retreat from modern life, no matter how fantastical they may seem, but instead as projects of reality distortion, are efforts to keep out ahead of the modern, of trying to will the world that is coming into the world as you would have it. And that desire is very much a product of the experience of modern life.